we're teaching, we're alive, we're like diamonds in the sky. Teach right like a diamond.
Teachers, stay tuned. I'm going to teach you how to design, differentiate, disseminate, and decorate an amazing Black History Month project.
Find light in this beautiful sea. I choose to be teaching you and I.
Hello, fellow fellows and fellow educators. This is Diamond Emerald bringing you another gem, God, good vibes, education, and motivation. This gem's topic is about, absolutely, our Black History Month projects. So I'm going to show you and speed through how I designed, differentiated, disseminated, and decorated this Black History Month presentation, or as you can see here, a Black HERstory Month project at Computer School for 2021. So note, been planning this for some time, involved multiple people in the planning process. Here's the end result. As you see on this beginning slide, I would present it just like I have it here with my slides of virtual background. It's more engaging. Not all teachers are doing it, so it grabs our attention. The slideshow template is visually engaging. I got this from another source that I'm using as a professor. So note, everywhere that I work, everywhere that I train, everywhere that I listen, I'm gathering information. I'm taking and getting nuggets and gems from every single source. So from my professorship, actually, is where I got the slideshow template. And this is from Slides Go to use this presentation, versus at another event, I'm using a support that I got from TNTP and the work I did with the teaching fellows as a support as I'm doing my teacher practice. So get gems wherever you can. The do now for this assignment is, who are these women? Write it in the chat. So as the class starts, there's music playing. I'm greeting each student by name as they enter the room. My co-teacher is there admitting students as well, and taking attendance, right? If this was another day, we might be switching. I'd be taking attendance as he greets and presents the do now. Students should be writing in the chat. I notice students at first are saying their names. Maybe some students don't know. Students are being very vague. If they're being vague, as I'm giving them time to answer, I'm going to ask students to make their answers more specific. If they say Kamala and Michelle, I'm like, okay, why do they matter? Add some adjectives and detail to those answers. That also is my first assessment to see what we're aware of, what we're not aware of. How they speak about these women is an assessment to see how I'm going to guide my discussion and descriptions as I move forward. Do I need to spend more time explaining their significance, or is it already clear? Maybe there's a language issue. How are they referring to them, as Black women or African-American women or colored women, right? There's some things I do not want them to refer to them as, and I will make that clear. So in terms of designing, the first thing that I had to do to design this project is to get an idea of what I wanted for the end result, right? We're doing backwards design. And when I think about what I want as the end result, I have to match that with the standard. So actually what I'm going to do now is skip ahead and note, as I'm sharing this virtual slide as a background, I can't skip any further. I can just go one by one, right? So the standards. If we're not teaching to the standards, what are we doing? Right? This is the way to create equity and access, to make sure that you're teaching to these grade level standards. My students are in a 6th grade grouping, but we teach 7th grade standards. So I'm taking two reading standards and 2 writing standards, right? And so I've identified that these standards are ones that I need to attune to, and that's how I create my rubric. Standard RH7, right? Integrate visual information with other information in print and digital text, okay? Analyze the relationship between a primary and secondary source on the same topic, okay? They have to, for writing standards, use technology, including the internet, winning, to produce and publish writing. And note, this standard didn't pop in there because of COVID. They've always had to be technologically relevant and competent. Let's use it to our advantage, teachers. And it says when they need to present the relationship between information and ideas clearly and efficiently. Have we modeled that for them? If we have, we can refer them to our examples. Conduct short research projects to answer a question, including a self-generated question. This is important. If I'm only having them answer a question, they are not meeting the standard. I need to push students to answer a self-generated question, drawing on several sources and generating additional related focused questions that allow for multiple avenues of exploration, right? That's the standard. Maybe students will only be meeting the standard for writing subpart A. Maybe they will only be able to conduct a short research project answering a question. They should have access to, they should be able to, they should be instructed to also include a self-generated question, and they should be taught how to do that. Whether or not students are able to complete that standard is, we'll see, right? But they should have the opportunity to, which is why I edited the rubric accordingly. I'm using a single point rubric, which is something that was introduced during one of the extreme teacher PDs. So I highly encourage you to sign up. And I also want to demonstrate that when I get information, I'm immediately able to apply it to my practice to test its efficacy. That's why I'm here before you. That's why I'm an excellent educator. And that's why I present PDs around the country on what I do best. I can teach you how to do this effectively. I can also tell you what pitfalls you may fall into. So using this 3-point rubric, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came directly from the standards. 4 standards are represented in this rubric. They're meeting standards if they get a 3, which is also aligned to the Common Core standards, right? That is meet standards. If it's a 2, you don't meet it. If it's a 4, it's above standard. If it's a 1, you didn't do it. That's the way that I'm grading, and that's the way our school grades as well. So in that way, students should be able to meet these things. I ask a student when I get to this slide to read it out loud. This is not how I present, dear teacher. I'm teaching you how I designed this content. I have a student read this out loud because not only will they have it on paper, they have it on screen, but I'm differentiating. Some students didn't need this PowerPoint at all. Some of them did. We're thinking about the disc, we have our D's, our I's, our S's, and our C's. One thing that I'm very confident about and clear about with my students right now is that I have some students who are presenting D behaviors that's also looking much like a C. So I have to make sure that I'm answering their questions. As I designed this assessment, this project, I'm specifically thinking of specific kids, not randomly. I know which questions they're going to ask, and so I embed that into my rubric. I know what they're able to do, so I make that explicit in my rubric. I know what questions they're going to ask, so not only do I have a rubric, I've created a checklist. Not for me, not for my I's, for my C's, for some of my D's, and even some of my S's. Because if you're an S and you want to support the crew, you're going to need to know how to support. So now I want to go back to the beginning of the slide to go over again how I would present this, because I talked about how I would design it, have an idea, and go with the standard. Our idea was that we wanted kids to teach a class, and we wanted it to be engaging. If it's boring, you fail. That was the gist. We had to put all the other pieces together. When I think about differentiation, I always have my class start out with that meditation. So that slide is there so I don't forget it. I'm using one of the daily gemstone meditations that I've already compiled. These ones are specific for Black History Month, so it's in line with the content that they're learning, so it should allow them to be engaged. And also, thinking of culturally relevant teaching, this is consistent with the time students need, because I ask them an academic question. I ask them to identify 2 Black leaders, right? Now I'm giving them time to process and calm down, but also stimulating their synapses to understand we're still in this. We're talking about Black history. If you're not on board, get on board. And after the meditation, we can get back into the lesson of the nitty gritty, starting with our objective, ideally. I have a different student read the objective. I'm not reading it because at this point, I've already done enough talking. Ask a student to read the objective out loud. I'm not going to read it to you. What I would then go to next, after that student read it out loud, if there was something garbly with their mic, or if they were said anything wrong, I would just reread it. I may not correct them, depending on the student and the time period, right? The time we have, but I would just reread it. This is a poster I made in Canva of the Black HERstory Month project. This is another supplement. This might be something that my S's need, who are supports and who are slower in pace, right? This is something that my eyes would enjoy because it's visually stimulating and there's not a lot of details, actually. That's what I should have led with. My eyes would enjoy this because it's visually stimulating. There's not a lot of details. The information is there. And what I did, and also what I'm going to do now, is I'm going to share what it looks like even bigger. So hopefully, right, even that screen share process was flawless because I practiced it before. I've downloaded this PDF and I've made it bigger so that my students can see it. It's embedded into the PowerPoint, but now I'm bringing it up. This is differentiation again, but for all of my students. And I'm asking them, if you saw on the slide, what do you see? What do you understand? Then my students begin to speak out. Oh, I understand that we're going to be researching about Black women. I understand that we have to present something to the class. I understand that we need primary and secondary sources. I understand that I can ask a teacher if I have a problem. I understand, and this is something that students didn't see a lot, report the who, what, when, where, and why. So that's something maybe going forward, or even redoing it now, I could make that more prevalent. Maybe I add a different color there, because I want every student to be able to do this. That's the minimum requirement. Furthermore, students weren't getting the main idea. I would ask questions like, are you working in groups or are you working individually? A student responded and said, I think we're, and I'm like, oh, pause. I want you to be confident. Will you look at the poster one more time? You said you looked at an image of two people. What does it say? Will you just read it out loud? The student read it out loud. I restated my question. So, are we working independently or working in groups? He answered confidently, we're working in groups. Beautiful. Now I can move on. I've checked his understanding, and ideally, I've mitigated other misunderstandings that are also happening in that moment in my classroom. The other thing that I did not put initially on this document was the due date. The due date is a week. Students are presenting over a week, but instead of writing that, which would have added more information, I just wrote due February 22nd, because ideally, if they're all done February 22nd, it'll be a great week because students are done in advance. This is something that I could give to a student who needs something short, sweet, and visually stimulating. I could also give this to a teacher, a co-teacher who needs something short, sweet, and visually stimulating. Note, I didn't put anything about the grading criteria here. According to this flyer, the grading criteria is be fun and creative, which is a huge part. So I'm okay with that if that's what they get. I've mentioned the primary and secondary sources, so therein lies another bit of grading criteria, but there's no reason for me to put a rubric on this poster. That's actually counterintuitive to what the behavior style of that student needs. But there is a rubric elsewhere. Going back to the share, I'm going to reshare my screen, my slides, the virtual background. And note, I've mentioned this on one of the videos I've done before, is when you do that, one of the downfalls of sharing your screen as a virtual background is that the PowerPoint seems to re-download every time you start up again. So the longer your presentation is, the longer that process will take. And then as you see, it goes all the way back to the beginning. So that's not always ideal. So if you're recording your presentations, you may want to pause and make sure that that's more seamless. But I wanted to highlight for you, dear teacher, how I would present and how it looks in class. So I get to this slide because every good project, every good assignment, every good anything has a clear model if you want students to learn. So the model that we've been using for a few years now is Kevin Hart's Guide to Black History. He does a beautiful, wonderful presentation on Netflix, just basically calling out the old faded stories that we're used to listening to about Black history and presenting the old stories in a new and interesting way. And also skipping over some people we heard about, but adding new light to some of them as well. So it's a wonderful Netflix feature. You should watch it for your own services. But what we did is I created this activity to teach them. What you're going to do is you're going to identify who is he speaking about. And for this section, I actually identified just the women because the HERstory project, I identified just the women so I can make it align to what my students are actually doing. How does he present their stories? I told them not to be boring, so I dare not present something that's boring. And they need to critique, how does Kevin Hart do it? Is he reading a book? Is he doing a stop action movie? Is he doing a live scene? Is he doing a puppet show? Is he doing a song parody? He does a lot of different things, so they need to identify that. And then there's a form to complete when they're done. I actually give them the form right away before we watch the clip because I want them to be able to take notes during the video. That's another way to differentiate. Some tasks will ask them to watch or to read something and then fill out the form at the end where they have to integrate all of that knowledge, remember it, put it together, and summarize it in a nice, neat way. Other times, we want students to capture information in the moment to see if they're able to retain that information in the moment, not necessarily at the end. And not all students are able to retain information from story one all the way to the end of the class if they're not taking notes in some way. So I often do this with my integrated co-teaching classes. Whatever the exit ticket is, we start with it from the top and we work on it during the class. They don't answer all 5 questions at the end. They answer all 5 questions like a worksheet as opposed to an exit ticket, a guided worksheet. I love guided notes. Love guided notes. So that's similar to what this activity would look like. For my co-teacher, the link is in the notes. It's already there. It's a not from the internet. It's something already downloaded to help me present. I don't have any technical issues because the video is already downloaded. I would do that for my co-teacher as well. I could have had it embedded in the slide itself. I did that for another video, and PowerPoint and Slides has been updating their work. So things just look better, right? Make sure you've updated everything. After the slide and after we've watched, I'm going to go back into detail. So also note, during the video, some of my C's really wanted to know what the rubric was or still had some pressing questions. They were already ahead of me. One of my D's, a student who identifies as a Dave with a DISC assessment, wrote publicly that he had a question. I was so excited. I said out loud, I know that you have a question, Dave. I'm so glad that you have a question, Dave. Keep listening because I bet that I already answered your question. Trust me, Dave, when I create my lessons, I think of you. I think of you all the time. And I really work to create this presentation in a way that serves you, Dave. So Dave, actually write to me privately. Write to me privately in the chat and let me see if I did a good job teaching and setting up this lesson. And if not, I'm just gonna learn more about you. So please write me your question in the chat. Dave followed through. He wrote me his question in the chat and I answered it in the handout. His question was already answered, which means I'm doing a good job as an educator meeting his needs. Another student wanted the rubric, right? I knew they would. I got one ready. And even though I didn't want everyone to look at it now because all the materials could be overwhelming, I direct messaged that student the rubric and they replied, thank you, because they were already done. They were ready to move on and start to do some deep thinking. And they were a high level student. I knew they were ready. So I was really excited to offer that to them. Now that we're on this slide, everything on these slides are just reiterating what's on a pre-made handout. I literally did the handout first. Then I copied and pasted the information into the presentation. There's time limits here that are clear. The background information, I am going to take a moment, teachers, to read to you because I want you to hear my voice, the way that I read it to my students, and I want to understand that it's important. This could have also been something, right? If you're not someone who reads with passion and conviction, that you either please ask a student to read. We've got some great readers. You know who they are by now. Maybe you direct message that student and tell them, this is very important. Please read this with integrity, right? Put emphasis on the white words, right? Something like that. And so even there was some edits here that I had to make that I made verbally as I read it, but I'm going to read it to you now. Malcolm X said, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected woman in America is the Black woman. The most neglected person in America is the Black woman. In the summer of 2020, a Black woman named Breonna Taylor was murdered by police in her apartment. This became a huge motivator for the Black Lives Matter protests. Say her name is a protest cry that is used to honor the many Black women who were murdered by police in the summer of 2019 and 2020. Furthermore, on January 20th, 2021, Kamala Harris became the first Black woman to become the Vice President of the United States. She is just one of many amazing Black female leaders today. This leads scholars to wonder, is the Malcolm X quote still true today? Despite if you believe we have arrived or not, this is still a question about the humanity of the American people. All of these experiences are American. Conduct research on a Black woman to add to this ongoing story. We get to our essential question, what does it mean to be an American? And what I stated here was, right, I'm not asking you what does it mean to be a Black woman, because to be a Black woman is to be American. And Americans are Black women. So as we answer this question, that's how I want you to think of it. I gave examples using the Kevin Hart documentary. The first woman he profiled was Mae Jemison. And so an example of what it means to be an American from Mae Jemison's perspective and from what he displayed, right, is that it means to be resilient because she did not give up on her dreams, even though doors were closed in her face. Versus Josephina Baker, which he profiled next. I would answer what it means to be American in terms of Josephina Baker is to stand for justice and equality around the world, even when you're not in America. Because in that story, he highlighted her work in the war and protecting people and how she adopted all these different kids of different shades and tones. Give clear examples, meet your kids where they are, and keep it pushing. I displayed this slide, which is also on the handout, which are examples. I didn't read it. I have a spinner, so when we do decide these, because students are working in various different groups, that's the hardest thing about this project was scheduling the groups, and I got my co-teachers to help me with that. These are the defaults, and I don't say that in a negative term, but if there are students who are like, I don't got nothing, if they spend this weekend not researching a woman who's working on the COVID vaccine, or a woman who's a Black scientist who was a mentor to other Black scientists, they're going to do their own thing, or like the hottest female gamer, whatever they want to do. If they're not going to do that, we have people that are wonderful that they can do research on. I already went over the standards with you. I would too go over the standards with my students. Ideally, we would break these apart. Super ideally, they would match, right? They could actually take a task. A task would be to match which part of the standard is represented by this level 3 criteria. They should be able to do it. You should be able to do it. That's a great teacher task. And then finally, methods for engagement and presentation. These are hyperlinks. So in the presentation, my students can click on and get access to these tools. And I mentioned how all these tools are free to make sure that everyone can engage in any type of way. One of my students even messaged me and said, well, what can we use online applications that aren't free? Yeah, if you have resources, use them. That just is better for your group. In the same way as a teacher, the more resources I have, the better my students' lives are. But that's about, teaching equality and pay and all that kind of stuff. But these were legitimate ideas. And I want to highlight at the bottom. It says, you know more than us, show off. We wanted to stress that so much, right? They can do exactly what we did, but we don't want that. I want to be surprised. I want to be shocked and awed. I want my students to teach me something that I can use to engage them if we're still doing this remote thing. Some students during this time already dropped in the chat, this seems like a fun project. I said, thank you. It should be. If it's not fun, you're doing it wrong. Ideas for tech usage. Jeopardy, Kahoot, Zoom skits, they see examples of wonderful assemblies that we do virtually. They're learning how to do Minecraft and stop motion videos in other classes. They're doing art projects that are absolutely related. I've seen it, right? So also knowing what your other teachers are doing in their class, there's no excuse for a student to say they don't want to do something when you know it was covered in their STEAM class or their computer arts class or their business class, right? A student can create a business for their Black History Month project. They have access to these, and then at the end, right, for more support, reach out. I have my information there for my students, and the other teachers' information is there too. But for you, dear teacher, my website is here, and my email address is here. The other thing I want to present before we go is what it looked like when they're filling out the slides, and what it looks like when they're taking notes. So, there's two things. So this is what the handout looks like. So that's the presentation. This is the handout that some students requested. Same information, different format. This is differentiation. And if I'm differentiating further for my 12 to 1 class, right, I might not have the entire background. I might just have the quote. I might verbally tell them the background. I might have myself being recorded explaining this to them. But a lot of text is overwhelming. So I can supplement that. They can get the information, but it doesn't have to be on the paper. I might, for students in a different class, assign them the groups, or that might just need to happen depending on the groups that were made. And then again, I have the rubric annotated. What I want to list here, these should be hyperlinked as well to be most accessible. I've listed potential jobs because some teachers and some students need that. Some groups are just going to go and fly. They know where they fit in. They know how to work together. They're good to go. Some groups, we're going to need this. There are some students who aren't showing up. And that's one thing to think about too. When I made the groups for my classes and differentiated, I did not group them DISC. I created a project thinking about those behavior styles, but I did not group them based on that, because in this project, attendance is really most crucial. And with virtual learning, that comes up into play sometimes. Some things you can do, kids will need to show up. Some things they have to show up. They have to show up here. So I grouped them based on attendance first. Then, right, ability, behavioral styles. I may have a high D, but if that high D doesn't show up, he's not executing for nobody. Be mindful of that. See in the groups, right? I tried to attend to all the different behavior styles in the group and access levels. And then I have a checklist. Even though the rubric is there, the slideshow is there, the checklist adds just a little bit more for kids who need it. And while they're watching the video, my dear teacher, the Kevin Hart film and getting practice on how they're going to support each other, they're looking at this form. They're filling in their name, their pod or section. They're remarking that Kevin Hart was today's presenter. When they present with their peers, it'll be a pod, or they'll have to list all the names of their group members. Who is a Black woman, right? So if there's multiple presenters in a day, for this virtual learning experience, they're gonna have to talk about one of them. In person, you had to take notes on everybody. And then you write an essay at the end, right? Which is really cool. Because all the evidence comes from your peers. It's a really awesome project. But for this, right, you focus on one person during the session because there are legit tech issues. You shouldn't be held accountable for that if your computer glitches out, but you are still held accountable for learning. Why is she someone worth studying? We do want them to connect to that essential question. But for today, we're just opening it up. And then they're going to grade Kevin Hart because they are too going to grade each other. And this would also help them be self-reflective. If they gave Kevin Hart a 1 for his presentation, what are they going to do to make sure that their presentation is a 4? So overall, dear teacher, I won't go back to the PowerPoint because it'll reload, and I don't want to take time to do that. I'm going to go back to this presentation, which shows clearly what I was trying to attempt, right? This Canva poster took me less than 20 minutes to create after I'd done all that hard work, and now I'm just decorating. Those Canva slides, those slides go slides, it's just decoration. You backwards design using the standards. You differentiate by thinking about your behavior styles and becoming a certified extreme teacher. You disseminate by creating a PowerPoint, and you saw how I taught the lesson. I showed you how I did it. You teach an engaging lesson that gets them hooked into the presentation by getting a wonderful example, an anchor example, right? Which was the Kevin Hart documentary. And then I decorate. I practice what I preach by using the things that I told them to use in my presentation. Feel free to use this exact HERstory month presentation for your students. The students are getting about a week to work on this, and they're presenting after that February break that we have. But I've had it where students work during February and present the first week of March. Whatever works for you. But feel free to use these resources. Feel free, please, to reach out to me if you want to create a project that meets the needs of your students. I have those Shine weekly sessions on Sundays. This Sunday, we're definitely going to check in about Black History Month along with your goals. And if you have some questions or concerns or disagree with me, please, let's talk it out. I'm here to support you and help you to fear not and shine bright. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Shine bright, teach right, you and I. Teaching kids like diamonds in the sky. Teach